We are welcoming today someone that a lot of people in Macedonia already have seen or heard in some capacity already, Professor Sem Vaknin. It's our pleasure to welcome you to our podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I don't think you need much of an introduction, but please go ahead and give us the short introduction.
Let's not waste time on me. I'm a professor of clinical psychology in several universities in Cambridge, United Kingdom. I just became visiting professor in Southeastern European University in Skopje and Tetovo. And I used to be visiting professor of psychology in Southern Federal University in Russia, in Rostov-on-Don, until the war started, and they kicked out all the foreigners. So I've been a professor all around, and I'm the author of dozens of books on personality disorders, economics, philosophy, etc. I don't have much to do in life, so I just write things and make videos. I have a YouTube channel with a few, with 500,000 subscribers. The channels deal with narcissism, with politics, with economics, with philosophy, and so on and so forth. So again, there's a wide range. I write short fiction, I write poetry. Let's call it the end of the introduction and get to business. Yeah.
It was a pretty good introduction, I have to say. Yeah. So people have heard you talk about various different subjects. Economics, politics, international politics, and also domestic politics in Macedonia from the time when you were an advisor to the government of Macedonia, if I'm not mistaken. So one thing that I haven't heard about, and I'm sure people will be wondering, is how did you end up in an advisory role on the government of Macedonia? This was some years prior. If you could go through the history of that.
I must warn you that I've been outside Macedonia for more than 7 years, almost 8 years. I lived in Russia, then I lived in Hungary, and then in the United Kingdom. So I'm not up to date with Macedonian affairs and so on, and we would be wasting time if you were to ask me about Macedonian affairs. I don't know much. I returned to Macedonia because I needed to be with my wife for some medical condition. But so historically, what happened is I had a friend here, an Israeli friend. I'm an Israeli. I had an Israeli friend who was living in Skopje, and I have worked with him in Serbia. I was advisor to many entities in Serbia, to the city of Belgrade, to some banks in Serbia, and so on and so forth, to the Ministry of Trade and Industry. And he was an Israeli, I'm an Israeli, and so we teamed up in Serbia, mostly socially. And then when he came to Macedonia, he left Serbia, he came to Macedonia. He has a good nose for opportunities. Macedonia was much more of an opportunity than Serbia after the Kosovo crisis. So he came to Macedonia and he told me, listen, this is a new country that's like Israel when it started. They're very nice people, they're kind people, empathic and warm, but they don't know much about anything. They don't know how to do things.
Especially how the world works.
Yes, they don't know about capitalism. They don't know about stock exchange. They don't know how to privatize companies. They're completely lost. They're clueless and lost. And as opposed to big countries like Russia, where all the eminent academics went, for example, Sachs and so on, no one wanted to come to Macedonia. It's too small, and there wasn't enough money here. So Macedonia was really begging. I remember that it was begging. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs in United Kingdom, Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Israel for help. And no one wanted to help. There was USAID, there was FSVC, but no one essentially gave any serious help. So I relocated here. I moved here. And I was
Where did you live?
I lived in Israel. I moved from Israel here.
No, I mean, where did you live in Macedonia when you relocated?
Skopje, immediately.
Skopje,
I came to Skopje. And I became advisor to the Agency of Privatization and advisor to the stock exchange. Essentially, I helped to build the stock exchange. And then various ministers, like the Minister of Finance and so on, asked for my help. And then I got involved with the VMRO, and the VMRO got into power. And I had a student, and I singled him out, and I told him, you're going to be very famous, and one day you're going to be Prime Minister of Macedonia. And he found it very, very funny because at that time he was a broker in some very small bank. His name was Nikola Gruevski. We wrote a book together. We published dialogues in, at that time, Dnevnik and other newspapers. We wrote a book together and published it. And when he became minister of, at the time, Minister of Trade, he invited me over back. I was living at that time in Czech Republic and Moscow. He invited me back. And that's how it started. I became advisor to the government and so on and so forth. That's,
So are you still
I
on
might-
friendly terms with the old prime minister?
Yes.
With Nikola
Yes.
Gruevski, yeah? Do
Nikola
you
is-
speak?
Nikola is among my best friends, absolutely.
Awesome. How is he taking what is
No,
happening?
I never gossip about my best friends.
Okay.
That's why
We-
they
we-
remain my best friends.
But maybe we can use your influence with him to get him on this podcast. He's been, I don't know, successfully avoiding us so far. Although we have been some of his staunchest supporters, his economic policies, his, his basically leadership through the international monetary crisis and all the rest of the stuff.
That's why that I was his best. I apologize for all these respiratory special effects. I can't help it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to talk. That I was his special friend did not mean that I was not one of his strongest critics. When he was in government, I was one of his strongest critics as a prime minister. And I disagreed with some of his policies, and I disagreed with his inability to control the corruption in the government. But we still remain very good friends, and I still think that Nikola Gruevski revolutionized Macedonia and has created single-handedly the modern Macedonia. The Macedonia we live in, everything from buildings to mentality has been shaped by Nikola Gruevski.
You will find no argument from us to that. I mean, we say on
That's
this
why-
podcast that objectively Nikola Gruevski has been the best prime minister of
The
Macedonia
greatest prime
of all
minister
times.
in history.
Absolutely.
I work with all of them. I work with Selvenkovsky. He's the greatest ever in Macedonia.
I have
That is
one
before
objection.
or
If I might interrupt, I have one objection. Gruevski continued to negotiate about our name. Okay, that's a mistake. He should have dropped the negotiations as soon as he came into power. He has no right to talk about my name and my grandfather's name and Macedonian name overall. So
Yeah,
that's a
well, I
mistake.
don't think he had much.
Unforgivable. Much
I don't
choice.
think he had much choice. I don't think he had much choice. He was
We had Hague International Court of Justice gave us a verdict in our use.
This was a
And,
good lesson of the value of any judgment of the International Court in Hague.
Yes.
I think for Macedonians.
I know they cannot implement
I
it.
don't think he had much choice. He was under tremendous pressure, but he negotiated. He did not conclude an agreement. There's a big difference between these two things.
He should
I mean,
not
we all
have
know how the
negotiated
actual
it.
agreement came about. So yeah. We don't
No,
want
it's
to
always the
really.
excuse.
Yep.
The
Sorry. go
excuse
ahead.
is always the pressure. They always say we have the pressure, this kind of pressure, that kind of pressure. There's no
If
right
you're a
to
small
talk
country-
about the name. Why
you're
would
a
you
small
say if somebody
country-
talks about Israel's name? Let's
Yeah.
change the name of Israel. So you don't let them talk about changing the name to Israel.
I agree.
Let's say
In
we're gonna
principle, I
call
agree.
Israel North Israel and Palestina from tomorrow. It's not gonna be like that. You're not allowed to talk about my name, and even the referendum failed. But anyway, when I'm talking, let me say hello to all the beautiful people watching us now. It's amazing that we're alive today in this age and time, and we have the opportunity to talk to such a knowledgeable person and a guest teacher, distinguished professor in many universities around the world, Professor Sem Vaknin. Guys, I just want to tell you that the real war with the psychopathology in our political representative is here. Everyone can see that they want to poison us. They want to delete us. It looks more like 1984, George Orwell. It's like it's the malignant home of the narcissistic political gangster right now, and we are
Wow,
attacking
Gotze wasting
right
no
now,
time.
right here. Yeah, we're going straight to the point. We are attacking the political gangsters and their narcissistic malignant nature. That's why we have the professor guest right now with us, because he's a treasure chest of knowledge in this regard, in this subject, and he can explain to us why this is happening. And we, the willing, right now, took the initiative, the fight against the unmoral, the immoral, right now, right here. And just so you know, the victory will be ours. The justice and the truth will prevail on the end. Macedonia and the world will survive this attack, the globalist, again, the woke, I would call it, attack. And they have awoken us, the sleeping giant. And we will take control eventually over our destiny.
All right. All right.
Okay.
Cool. So let's continue. How did your cooperation with the various Macedonian governments ultimately finish?
Then we all lost the elections as the Sem came to power, and that was the end of that. And I moved on. I became a professor in various universities, so I moved away from politics and economics. But I think we shouldn't waste time on my ancient history in Macedonia, and we should talk about, for example, what Goce mentioned. I think it's more of interest to people than what happened to me with various ministers here and there.
Well, they say that,
I will be collaborating now again with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, if it gives you any comfort.
Okay.
Let me say this. They say more you know, you can better predict the future. So let's make some predictions. I mean, you predicted that Gruevski will become a prime minister, and based on your knowledge, you had the right prediction. Will this new political global elite will become our new gods? Apparently, we're becoming their slaves. They're manipulating. We're eating their narrative and their propaganda for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The narrative is you can see it. Everyone can see the narrative where it's going. You know, even on the Olympics. Will the freedom of speech further deteriorate in the global slave state? As you can see, what happened to this guy, the Wikipedia, not the Wikipedia, the what you call him?
It is the Wikipedia. Oh, you mean
Assange.
Okay.
Julian Assange. He spoke outside of United States about
WikiLeaks,
things. Yeah, WikiLeaks. He spoke outside of United States. He's not even a citizen of United States. He spoke about United States, and he ended up in jail. So where is the freedom of speech? You understand me? Even us here talking right now, we are subjugated on this law that's not allowing us to speak. You know, the freedom of speech. And this is the narrative. Will they kill and bury deep underground the logic, the truth, the tradition, the gender roles, the family? Will they manage to kill God in all of us? That's the question. And invent new commandments, new moral values in the future, if the future is human at all.
Goce,
yes.
Let's ask the professor. Give us your understanding of the state in which the world geopolitics is right now. What do you consider is happening currently in the world? How are the battle lines politically drawn, and what is happening basically? What is your estimation of what is going on in the world right now?
I've been in another talk show, and when I started to explain what I think is happening, the host got very angry, and I had to terminate the interview because he confused analysis with preference. When I analyze the world, doesn't mean that this is what I want or this is what I like, but this is what's happening. Reality is not always, likable or acceptable or tolerable or bearable. Very, very often it's not. So what I see, first of all, it's important. I think history can be reconceived as an interplay between the masses and the elites. At each point, there's a different elite, of course. It could be the nobility. It could be rich people in capitalism. It could be, but there's always an elite. There's no question about it. And then there are always masses, by definition. Sometimes the masses take over. Sometimes the elites take over. And when the masses take over, the elites do their best to destroy the masses. And when the masses take over, they do their best to destroy the elites. Today we're in a situation where countries like China and its satellite, Russia, because Russia has become a satellite of China. It's no longer an independent country in any meaningful sense. Iran and so on. These countries are offering an alternative model to liberal democracy and to capitalism. An alternative model, which is essentially an etatist model, a model of the control of the state. In these countries, free speech is not only non-existent, but is considered to be a crime or a violation of values, Confucian values, for example, in China. In the West, free speech exists, but it's meaningless. It has zero impact and zero influence. It is a form of self-deception. The elites allow the masses to express themselves in all kinds of podcasts and so on, but this has zero impact on policy, on decision-making, on choices, on values, on narratives, zero impact. Mm-hmm. So the world is divided in two parts, where there is no pretension for democracy. For example, China and Russia and so on. There's no pretension of democracy. And there's no pretension of free speech. These countries are much closer to reality and much less deceptive. They're much less deceptive. And then we have the West, or what's left of the West, because it's dwindling, it's declining, of course. What's left of the West, where there is a mass deception. Deception by the elites. The masses are lured and deceived into believing that they have influence once every 4 years, or because they have access to Amazon or Wikipedia, or because they can make podcasts. This is a lie, a big lie. This is the big lie. And so the West is indistinguishable from China. The West is indistinguishable from Russia. The only difference is, in Russia and China, they don't pretend. They don't fake.
Do you think that this was always the case, or do you think that this is a recent development?
No, that was always the case.
Even from the beginning, 18th century, 19th century.
Always. Throughout human history. Throughout human history, the elites ruled. When the masses erupted and revolted, and of course, this happened, the French Revolution, Russian Revolution, and so on and so forth, it took a few decades, and the elites suppressed the masses in a variety of ways. The only difference is, in the last 100 years, the elites became much more sophisticated, much more subtle, much more clever. And whereas up to 100 years ago, the elites didn't bother to pretend, they were clearly the masters, and the masses were the slaves, and there was no pretension about it. In the past 100 years, the elites learned how to deceive the masses, how to tranquilize the masses with promises of power through democracy, empowerment through technology, and all the rest of the bullshit, if you excuse the word. Yeah. The masses feel that they are empowered because they have access to cameras, streaming services, publishing services on Amazon. Their voices are heard on YouTube. They think they are followed by millions sometimes. They have million followers or millions of followers. And the masses confuse this with real power. Real power has nothing to do with popularity, nothing to do with access, nothing to do with technology, and definitely nothing to do with the charade, the masquerade of democracy.
What does it have to do with?
Real power has to do with the allocation of economic resources, starting with land and everything that comes out of the land. So it's agriculture, then manufacturing, then finance. All of it comes essentially from the land, and the allocation of economic resources determines the distribution of power. Power asymmetry exists because the allocation of economic resources is skewed, is not
it's
equal.
Asymmetric, basically.
Not symmetric, not equal. And that's the end of it.
How do you explain something like Brexit? How do you explain something like Trump? These are things that we've witnessed the world's elites fighting against those occurrences and losing.
Not really. The European Union wanted the United Kingdom out for a very long time. The United Kingdom was a troublemaker. They undermined many initiatives. They refused to join the euro. They were the enfant terrible of the European Union. And when the United Kingdom left the European Union, everyone had a sigh of relief. Everyone was happy, and they will never take the British back. On its part, the British had to make a choice between Europe and United States. There was a choice there. And they made their choice. They chose the Pacific, not the Atlantic. It is through the United States that the United Kingdom can gain access to China, Asia, and emerging markets everywhere. And so they created this axis. And if you look at history, with the exception of the last 400 years, the only exception, China was the superpower. That's history. China was the superpower. And America and Britain were allies. There was an axis, special relationship between Britain and its colonies. So we are just back to normal. China is becoming the superpower again, and Britain belongs to the United States again. Europe, it has an alliance, has a European Union. Everyone thinks that this is unprecedented. That is not true. There have been 3 other unions of similar size previously. In the 13th century, there was the Zollverein, which was a customs union of most of Europe, especially the northern part. And then later on, there was a coalition of Europe, which was augmented after the Vienna conference in 1815, after Napoleon. And throughout this period, various leaders in Europe created a European Union. Napoleon created a European Union. Adolf Hitler.
By conquest.
Never mind by which means. The fact is fact. Adolf Hitler created a European Union. Prior to these two, Charlemagne created a European Union. The unity of Europe in a supranational entity is the normal state of Europe, not the abnormal state. And the Brexit is the normal state of relationship between the United Kingdom and Europe, because the United Kingdom was always in splendid isolation. They always distanced themselves from Europe. That's the history. And China, being the superpower, is the normal state of history, because when Europe was a toilet in the 10th century, China was already 4,000-year-old civilization and culture, and controlled the vast majority of the world through, later on, the Mongol dynasties. Mongolians, who were essentially an extension of China after the 13th century, Mongolians conquered all of Europe. Almost all of Europe. Not all, but almost all of Europe.
They got as far as Bulgaria, I think.
Yeah, they got as far as Hungary, Bulgaria, and parts of Spain. So when you need to look at history not in the last 40 years, not even in the last 400 years. If you want to have real historical insights, you need to look at it over the last 4,000 years.
But I mean, I do get your point, but I think that's kind of glossing over, it's generalizing over a lot of nuances. It's a different thing to unify as independent states and build towards a union where everyone will be a participant, and it's a different thing to unify, to occupy someone and kind of force your ideology or your economics all on top of them. But even so, I would say, when we look at Brexit, it is undeniable that, are you saying that the entire media, the entire EU elite, the entire English political elite, were they playing when they were actively campaigning, when they were basically calling people that were calling for Brexit, they were calling them, I don't know, unwashed masses, fascist, whatever, I mean, if that's what they, and after Brexit, they made the separation super painful for Britain. Are you saying that was all some sort of an elaborate scheme? Because we witnessed this in reality.
Not elaborate scheme. I'm not prone to conspiracy theories. But I can tell you that the European elite with whom I am acquainted, I'm not that acquainted with the British elite. But I can tell you that, of course, the British elite did not want Brexit because Britain was a net receiver of benefits in some areas like fishing and agriculture. But the European elite, this I can tell you with authority and certainty, because I know and knew the people, were delighted, absolutely delighted. They were worried about setting a precedent. They were worried about setting a precedent, nothing to do with the United Kingdom. It was about setting a precedent. Similarly, should Hungary secede tomorrow, there would be celebrations, secret celebrations, of course. There would be celebrations in the European Union headquarters and in the basements when no one sees them. Some countries are undesirable. They're troublemakers. It's not worth it. It's not worth it to have Hungary, which is a tiny country. They're making troubles which cost the European Union way more than the GDP of Hungary. So who needs this? Unfortunately,
would you say the same thing about Poland, for example?
No, Poland is much bigger, and Poland is also, I think, much more flexible, much more fluid in its political arrangements. Hungary is a dictatorship. I lived there for 2 years. It's a dictatorship. It's all but name. Yeah, I mean the courts, the media. I've given interviews to RTL. RTL is the A1 of Hungary.
I see.
Before A1 was dismantled, I've given many interviews to RTL, and I got friendly with the journalists in RTL and so on and so forth. And I can tell you, there was terror, absolute terror, and censorship and everything. It's a dictatorship. While Poland is not. In Poland, there are still active processes of interpolitical conflict and dialogue and active coalitions, and so it's still more so-called democratic. All democratic processes are a sham because the real positions of power, the real centers of power, are not in the hands of the parliament or the government they're behind the scenes. And it's not a conspiracy theory. That's how things operate. And so,
okay, then let's talk about Trump then.
What about
how
Trump?
do we explain that in this worldview?
Well, I just said that there are periods where the masses revolt and threaten the elites, and then there are periods when the elites take over or reassert control and suppress
so
the
you would
masses.
say in the US right now we are living through a period where the masses are wresting control out of the
but it's temporary and they will fail. History shows that the elites always succeed. And today in the United States, the elites are fighting back in two ways. They're trying to delegitimize and criminalize Donald Trump and his movement.
Absolutely, yeah.
Shoot him.
And on the other hand, members of the elite are trying to bribe Donald Trump.
Infiltrate basically their way into Donald Trump.
Take over.
Yeah.
People like Elon Musk and so on. And the oil industry and so on. So either they will buy him or they will destroy him. It's a question of time. They will.
Yeah, obviously, they already tried destroying him a couple of times.
They haven't started yet, in my view.
Okay, can I ask something? We're talking most about the methods. I want to talk a little bit about the reasons by which these rationalizations are constructed by the politicians and this elite that we're talking about. What are the rationalization behind this? Is it narcissism, pathology? Can we get a little bit deeper into this?
Money, power, land, benefits, the good life. What more? What other motivations do you need? You can ask another question, whether there is a specific psychological profile of people who desire money and power and sex and yes, the answer is yes. people whose main motivation is the accumulation of power and money and so on and so forth, they are known as dark personalities. And dark personalities are basically narcissistic, psychopathic, and Machiavellian, manipulative. And a small percentage are sadistic. So this is the profile of the elites, and it's always been the profile of the elites. It is a fact of life that narcissists, psychopaths, and to a smaller extent sadists, but mainly narcissists and psychopaths, are manipulative, and they rise to the top, and they take over, and they manage, and they execute, and they accomplish things because they are oblivious to the risks, and they believe themselves godlike, and they believe in impunity and immunity. They're untouchable. So they assume many more risks, and consequently they are more accomplished, because the more risks you assume, the higher the rewards if you succeed. So gradually, over centuries, these people, the narcissists, the psychopaths, they accumulated wealth. This is the work of Thomas Piketty. Thomas Piketty is a French economist who analyzed this process and proved conclusively that the vast majority of wealth today was not created by any economic activity. It was passed through generations, intergenerational transmission. And so it started with an original narcissist in the cave. He had a bigger, and he got the beautiful woman. And over the generations, these families handed the wealth from one to the next, and so on and so forth. And today there is a concentration of power and money and access and contacts in these groups. And yes, you're absolutely right. There is a psychological profile. Another thing is, one of the big lies, because we are living in an environment of deception and fallacious narratives, also known as lies. One of the big lies is democracy. I mentioned it. Another big lie, if you work hard, you will succeed. If you work hard, you will have a good life. That is completely untrue, and this time I'm speaking as an economist, not as a psychologist. Social mobility is the way you move up the ladder, the way you progress socio-economically in correlation to the work and the effort you put in. Social mobility in the United States, for example, is the lowest in the industrial world. Lowest.
That's not true. No.
That is true, unfortunately.
No, 60% of basically of the people the wealthiest people in the US are people that have acquired new wealth and not inherited wealth.
Social mobility in the United States is the lowest in the world. You may wish to update yourself.
That's the last time I've seen. There was a big.
I'm sorry. Go on.
There was a big difference between social mobility in Europe and social mobility in the US.
You're right. Social mobility in Europe is higher. You're right. Social mobility in Sweden, in Germany, and so on is higher than the United States. You're absolutely right. There is a difference.
No. But when I was reading it, it was basically
what you were reading. I don't know what you were reading.
Maybe we're talking about two different things.
No, I'm not talking about two different things. You're wrong.
I'm talking about.
Peter, you can be wrong. It happens. You're wrong.
But I haven't made my point yet. My point was that I read that in the US, most of the wealth accumulated is not inherited wealth. Is basically produced wealth within a single generation.
You're wrong.
While in the US, Europe,
all your information is wrong. So what are we here to distribute disinformation? You're collaborating with the elites. You're wrong. You're wrong. Most of the wealth.
I might be wrong. That's not the problem. I'm just saying something that I've read and that I've
then you have not read
been made aware of. It might be wrong. It might be outdated. It's not.
Peter, you are wrong. End of story.
I will look this up for sure.
Look it up. I encourage you to educate yourself. Let's proceed.
So what we were saying before, that you were saying that all wealth is basically
not all wealth. No, absolutely not all wealth. But the majority of wealth.
The majority of the wealth has been kind of chugging along from the beginning of time.
Yes, that is the work of Thomas Piketty, which is the authority on wealth in the world.
I see.
Piketty is Piketty.
Thomas Piketty.
Thomas Piketty. Yeah, it's a French economist.
Okay.
So Thomas Piketty analyzed the wealth in the United States also, and he proved conclusively that most of it is inherited, actually. As to social mobility, there are the figures, the authoritative figures are published by the OECD and by the NBER, the National Bureau of Economic Research, and the United States is at the bottom of social mobility. It is much less social mobile than, for example, Sweden and Germany, believe it or not. Now, of course, your protestations are example of the brainwashing of the elite.
It's the first time I've heard this. So,
Okay.
I mean, obviously I'm going to protest.
This is example of the brainwashing of the elite. Because the elite wants you to believe that if you work hard, you can make it. That social mobility is high, that, you know, all you have to do is invest yourself and commit yourself and get educated and so on and so forth. And
Okay, I buy this. That's not the way to get ahead. How is the way to get ahead?
This is the brainwashing of the elite. The way to get ahead is to marry into the elite or something like that. There is, unfortunately, at this stage, especially in the United States, but definitely I agree with you also in Europe, social mobility is low. Comparative social mobility is higher in Europe than in the United States. But in general, it's low. So today, social mobility is a huge problem because, for example, wages have been frozen for well over 4 decades. The first increases in wages started in 2016. After 40 years, almost 40 years, depending on the country, 30 years, 40 years, that wages were frozen and did not go up. So while capital had huge returns, so people who had capital became richer, the rich became richer, the poor became poorer because wages were suppressed. Introduction of temporary work, introduction of Uber jobs and Mac jobs and so on and so forth. Work, as the millennials and Generation Z have discovered, work sucks. Work is to enrich the elite, basically. Income inequality today is the second highest in human history. Second highest. The first highest was in the 1920s, in the Gilded Age in the United States. And the second highest is today. And today, about 1% of humanity control, depending on your definition, that is debatable, but about 1% of humanity control more wealth than the lower 50% of humanity. And if you change the definition of wealth a bit, they control 90% of the wealth in the world. That's 1%. And that is the famous 99% or 1% movement.
But isn't that the case in everything? In every hierarchy? Like the Pareto rule, for example?
Income inequality is the highest it's ever been, except the 1920s. That again is a fact that you cannot argue with. I'm sorry. It has not been this way in the 18th century.
Would we say that income inequality today is higher than what it was in basically feudal or in the Pharaoh time in Egypt?
Which part of second highest in human history is difficult for you to absorb?
The part where I can't imagine that the income inequality was lower in Pharaoh Egypt than it is in.
You're deeply into stereotypes and deeply into narratives. You're not a scientist, clearly, evidently.
Okay, what percentage of people
study a bit before you make statements like this?
I'm an electrical engineer, so
Okay.
all I know has come from
electrical engineering. I promise.
So, but this is a serious question. What percentage of people would have wealth in Pharaoh Egypt?
There have been studies of income inequality starting with the most ancient civilizations until today. The problem in ancient civilizations, the accumulation of wealth was not as massive as today. The richest people in human history are living today, are alive today.
In absolute value, I would say yes, but in relative value,
And also relative value. They are living today by far, by the way. People in the ancient world, they had severe difficulty to accumulate wealth because productivity was much lower. And the wealth that they have accumulated was usually buildings or non-productive assets. there were no capital markets. There was no concept of interest even. Interest was forbidden until more or less the 15th century. So capital did not create capital. On the contrary, capital was eroded when there was inflation. Inflation was rare, very rare, but capital was eroded when there was inflation. Buildings and so on were non-productive. So they lived hand to mouth. The rich people lived hand to mouth. They had like 1,000 workers, and these 1,000 workers produced food, and they ate the food that same year. If the next year there was famine or some natural disaster, they were screwed. They didn't have reserves. If you read the Bible, for example, read the Bible. So Pharaoh is absolutely in panic that the next year there will be no crop. The next year will be famine, will be drought. So Pharaoh built big warehouses with the advice of a Jew, Joseph. He built big warehouses where he stored grain. He stored grain because he was terrified of the drought. But why was he terrified of the drought? Because they had no reserves. That was the problem. There was, and Karl Marx, by the way, was the first to make this observation. Karl Marx said that we in capitalism have created surplus economies. There was no surplus before. We were living hand to mouth. And then in the Industrial Revolution, we started to create surplus. And this surplus is the cumulative wealth that made many people rich, starting with the industrialists. So we have transitioned from non-surplus to surplus economies, and that's why income inequality nowadays is the biggest in history. Because these people are accumulating all the time. Even if they don't do anything, if Elon Musk tomorrow stops working, doesn't do anything, and leaves his money in the bank, even with the current low interest rates in some countries, he would still get a fortune. He make a fortune every year.
And why isn't he doing that?
Because he needs to work. What do you mean? He's a young man. He wants to go to work. He wants to challenges. He wants to. This is something personal.
So working hard. So basically, what that means is working hard doesn't need to have wealth as an ultimate goal, because we have someone like Elon Musk who is already wealthy, and he's still basically working possibly more than any other person.
I agree.
So
I agree. The motivation to work hard can be related to money, but actually rarely is. It rarely is related to money when you work hard.
So it is good advice for someone to say, let's take the monetary incentive out of it. Let's say if you want a better life, if you want more meaning and purpose in your life, you need to work hard.
I agree.
Okay.
I'm saying the
So
lie.
here we're finding common ground.
I'm saying the lie is when you say to someone, if you want to progress in life, if you want to get rich, if you want the benefits of life, you need to work hard. That's the lie. The lie is not about working hard. Working hard is good. Psychologically, by the way, working hard is good. Although if you work the way we work today, many of the psychological benefits are missing. If you work as self-employed, if you work alone, if you work in isolation, if you don't interact with other people, if you're not in an office, that has negative psychological impact. But if you work with other people, collaborate in teams, and you work hard, I agree with you. That has very great benefits psychologically.
So you were talking about the elites and the masses always being kind of at odds at each other historically through the history of the universe, but through of the civilization. But I mean, we are seeing, like today, the civilization that we're living in today is markedly different than the civilizations previously. I mean, we can see with the advent of ideologies, with the advent of the ideology of democracy, with the advent of the concept of private property, with the advent of the rule of law and the Leviathan state, which enforces the rule of law equally for strong and weak, I would say that is proof enough that at least if we're not out of that historic animosity that you describe, that we are at least moving towards a direction where the masses, I mean, you could argue that it's relative, but they do have.
You're seriously brainwashed.
They do have. No, but I'm asking you a question. Would you say?
You're telling me that the law applies equally to the poor and the rich? What do you mean?
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, a member of the masses today you could argument that he has more rights and more privileges than he had any time previously in the history of the universe.
On paper.
But not on paper. I mean,
no, on paper, absolutely. There are numerous studies that demonstrate that the rich are treated by the law in all its levels very, very differently to the poor.
But even if I grant you that, the poor today, I'm not talking about the difference between the poor today and the rich today.
But if
I'm
you
talking
don't get
about
justice,
the poor today.
But you're confusing narrative with outcomes. That you have access to the courts is meaningless if you don't get justice.
Let's not talk about the courts. Let's talk about the relative wealth. Like the poorest person today, you would agree that he has more wealth than any previous time in history. The
Agreed.
Poorest person. So
what? Agree. Yes.
You would agree with that? Yeah. So
Yeah.
I would say the result of that is the fact that each individual person, even the lowest levels, there is a way for them now to own property, to basically be paid. I mean, you may say it's not fair, but a wage for their work, So there is a way for a poor person, the bottom of the ladder, to have some semblance of a normal life while having most degree of control.
The prison conditions have improved. I agree.
Okay, can I say something, Peter?
Sure.
I'm sorry, Sam. Peter, you're talking about the percentage of democracy in certain society. Back in the days, the percentage was lower. As Aristotle says, democracy is alive, it evolves. So we're talking about the percentage or percentages of democracy implemented in particular society. On a large scale, democracy is still a utopia. It doesn't exist. We're still slaves to the 1%, as Sam says. It's just a different spectrum of democracy. Somewhere, some people are more segregated. Some other country people have more rights and more possibility to climb up the ladder and achieve some success for a decent life. But it's far, far away, as Sam says, it's far, far away from the 1%. In order to get to the 1% and become
I mean, you don't have to be a part of the 1% in order not to be a slave. Most of the people in the world today are not slaves. I'm not a slave. You're not a slave.
Most people in the world today are slaves, but to different things.
How?
They are slaves, for example, to consumption. They're slaves to consumer goods. They are slaves to narratives, lies like democracy, the rule of law.
But how are they slaves to them? They want to consume those things.
That's the slavery.
mainstream media.
But how is that a slavery is being forced to do something? I mean, if someone, okay, what's an example of a slavery that's
the worst type of slavery is when you don't know that you're a slave. That's the worst type of slavery.
But if you don't know that you're a slave and none of your existence is an existence of a slave, you have the freedom to do what you want when you want it, then in what respect are you actually a slave?
Actually, majority of young people have woken up and they do realize the slavery element in capitalism and consumerism.
What is that?
They do realize the slavery element and they are opting out of society, of the workplace, so there's an awakening process. That what has happened is, I agree with you that the conditions in the prison have improved. Even I would say dramatically improved. There's more food, more entertainment. You have a television now, you have a refrigerator, and you think because of that you're not a slave. First of all, you're a slave to the television and the refrigerator. But you're a slave in mentality. You will not think to undermine the established order because you have a television and a smartphone. That's your slavery. Your slavery is you'll be afraid to lose your smartphone. You'll be afraid to lose your miserable job with pitiable income. You'll be afraid to lose the bribes that the elites gave you. You will be
But
afraid.
I mean, you don't have to have that job. You can look for another job.
Whatever job.
So
Doesn't
all
matter
jobs have pitiful wages.
All jobs
and
are pitiable, of course.
my
they are.
job doesn't.
All jobs are. You are getting a fraction of what you should be getting, what you should be paid. How do I know? Because other people are getting insanely rich, disproportionately rich.
But
For example, a typical manager, typical chief executive officer in any company in any country in the world makes 600 to 6,000 times the salary of the worker. A typical chief executive officer.
and you think that's not fair?
I have no interest in fairness, right and wrong. I have interest in reality.
Oh, so you're saying
This is
that's the
reality.
situation? Okay.
I think it does not reflect a differential of productivity, if that's what you're asking. Yes.
What is
Oh, so
what is the
so in
ceiling
that sense, so if you're saying that someone is getting compensated for not congruent to the amount of work in a higher,
Contribution.
yeah. So he's not being so he's being disproportionately compensated for his contribution, but that's the definition of unfairness.
That's up to you. I'm not interested in fairness, not fairness and so on. I'm interested in reality. You have a right.
Would you agree? Would you agree that a CEO has much more responsibility about
Nothing
the health and
nothing justifies $45 billion salary. End of story.
Who's making
How far is
45
gonna
billion?
go?
Elon Musk.
Somebody-
Elon Musk
somebody.
has received-
He's not making 45 billion. That's his
Elon
net
Musk
worth.
has signed a contract for $45 billion salary. You are not updated.
What is that, a yearly salary?
It's his salary, options and everything. Even if it is not yearly, even if it is for the next 100 years, it's not justified.
I mean,
Can I ask?
if it's for the next 100 years, maybe it is justified. You know.
Well, it's not for the next 100 years.
But my point is, like, I mean, come on, no one's
Well,
making 45 billion.
The average salary of a
I agree
by
that
the way,
there are people worth billions of dollars,
No.
but that's the
No.
combined worth of all
no,
their
there are
holdings
no
and
people-
potential.
No, there are no people worth billions of dollars. None.
But in reality, there are.
No one is worth billions of dollars. That is, again, your brainwashing. No one is worth billions of dollars.
Oh, you mean
Analysis-
like in actuality they're not worth? As a person,
Analysis
they're
of-
not worth.
No one is worth a salary of billions of dollars. End
I'm
of
saying their net worth, their combined value of the stuff they
most
own.
of the net worth of the 1% has nothing to do with work or productivity.
That we agree.
It has to do with capital markets and has to do with
Can I ask
inheritance.
then? Can I ask then, what is the ceiling of the capitalism? How far this bubble is going to blow and go? These non-tangible assets introduced into the marketplace, the consumerism that you're talking about, the pathologies related with the consumerism in our day and age. Is there any relation in this with the increase in feminism and all of this, the pathologies related to this new time and age that we live in, regarding the expansion of capitalism and all this consumerism being in the narrative in all mainstream media?
I think these are two questions, basically. I'll answer the first and then the second. The first one is, how long can it last? Indefinitely. As long as there are people like Petar who are happy with his smartphone, happy with his podcast studio, happy with his job, there will be no revolution, of course, and capitalism will continue indefinitely. And I'm not criticizing Petar for being happy. I'm criticizing him for not being woke, not being open, not realizing that he's being brainwashed. I'm criticizing him for accepting the narrative as true when it's manifestly false, if you study the data. But I'm not criticizing him for making this choice. Petar has a right to say, I am happy with my smartphone, I'm happy with my television, I'm happy with my job, and fuck you. That's it. It's good enough for me. And I don't want to change this. I don't want to change this. I'm happy as I am. He has a perfect right to say this. And there's no point or possibility to argue with him because that's a value judgment. It's a value judgment. But many of the statements he made are not supported by data, and that is where we part ways. So the answer to your first question, as long as the elites bribe the masses, bribe them, this is mito y korupcja. As long as the elite bribe the masses, and the masses are considered a bribe to be reasonable and acceptable and desirable, then we will continue to have this regime forever and ever. Amen. Your second question, I think, is even more interesting, and that is a connection between feminism and capitalism. Capitalism is not an organizational principle. It's not a way to organize society. That's a common mistake, to believe so. Capitalism is a way to allocate resources. Capitalism tells you how to allocate scarce resources in order to produce more and distribute more. So it's an allocative system. But capitalism started off as an allocation mechanism. And then, as actually I think Petau said, if I remember correctly, then it became an ideology. And the ideology of capitalism involves elements which have nothing to do with capitalism. For example, growth. There's nothing in capitalistic theory that talks about growth. Growth is not an integral element of capitalism. You can have capitalism in an economy which is stagnant over 200 years. It would still be capitalism. So growth has nothing to do with capitalism. Growth is an outside import, something, a transplant on capitalism. When you combine capitalism with the philosophy of growth or the ideology of growth, what you come up with is known as consumerism. Because you need people to consume more and more. You need more and more people to consume more and more in order to produce growth. Otherwise, there's no growth. And what happened in the 20th century is that 150 million men lost their lives. 150 million consumers lost their lives. And there was a shortage of consumers and a shortage of manpower. That's a fact.
Sorry, when you were saying, when did this
throughout
happen?
the century, throughout the 20th century, 150 million men lost their lives artificially, not because of natural causes.
As part of the wars, yeah.
Wars, and there was the pandemic, the influenza pandemic in 1918. 60 million men died on that pandemic alone. There were another 25 million men who died in the Second World War. 20 million men died in the First World War. A total of 150 million. So these 150 million people were consumers. And there was a shortage of consumers and a shortage of manpower. The capitalists panicked. You can see it in the work of Keynes, the economist. There is panic, absolute panic. Keynes says, wow, what are we going to do to regulate unemployment, to stabilize inflation? I mean, there was a panic. And then they came up with a brilliant idea. Let's introduce women into the workforce. Let's convert women into consumers by giving them a salary, by taking them out of the home, bringing them into factories, into offices, we will be able to justify giving them a salary, and they will consume this salary. So here is the engine of growth that we were looking for because of a shortage of men. This is not just a theory. That's exactly what happened. Already in the First World War, 20 million women started to work in factories, especially munitions factories and so on. During the Second World War, 45 million women joined the workforce. They worked in transportation, they work in medical services, they work in education, they work in munitions factories and so on. Suddenly, tens of millions of women joined the workforce. Prior to that, the majority of women in the 1940s and 1950s were housewives. And suddenly, there were another initially 100 million new consumers. And these new consumers rebooted the post-war economy and became, of course, part of society.
But wait, weren't they more consumers when they were housewives because they didn't need to get paid? Only
No.
their husband needed to get paid, but they would still consume. And there is research that says even when women were not voting and working, they had more control over how the household income was spent.
Yes, but there was a single salary.
Yeah,
The
but
salaries,
that means they would consume.
the salaries of men actually, Petar, you really must begin to accept the authority of data. Data, not your opinions, not your prejudices, not your stereotypes, data. Here's the data. The salaries of men after the Second World War, during the 1950s and 1960s and 1970s up to the end, up to 1979, salaries of men exploded, went up dramatically. Add to this the salaries of women. So the aggregate salaries went up dramatically because the men were working, they were getting paid more, and now there was a second salary at home of the woman, which did not exist before. You're right that women made important decisions about consumption when there was a single salary. But after that, there was more salary, not less salary, to distribute and to consume. And this definitely restarted and rebooted the engine, the economic engine, post-war. The problem is this: when you give people money, they discover their power. When they discover their power, they want rights. When they want rights, this creates conflict, societal conflict. Anytime there's a group which demand new rights, this creates conflict. And so feminism transitioned from the first and second phase, which were pre-war. Feminists transitioned to the third wave and the fourth wave, which is a very aggressive, conflict-based kind of variant of feminism. Women became wage earners. Today in the United States, 43% of all primary wage earners are women. Under the age of 25, women make more money than men. Under the age of 25. If you take the overall, women make less money than men. But under the age of 25, which is the future, women make more money than men. Women are 1.8 times more educated than men. In degrees, MA, MSc, and PhD, almost 2/3 are women, 1/3 are men.
I mean, but again, who is educating them? It's the establishment that's educating them.
The establishment is also women.
And if it's educating, if the establishment is educating them, they're educating them to be good slaves, right?
Good consumers, yeah.
Good consumers, right? So I mean, yeah.
So women are definitely the future, because women are much better educated than men. I'm talking about specific countries, of course. I'm not talking about Afghanistan, but United States, for example. Women are much more educated than men, and education is the major predictor of lifelong income. The more you're educated, the more income you make lifelong. That's the major predictor, the number one. So because women are much more educated, they're going to make much more money. Because they're going to make much more money, their dependency on men, cultural, societal dependency, but also economic dependency, has vanished. And when you're not dependent on someone, you have the tendency to rebel and revolt, of course, especially if you've been a slave for 10,000 years. So back to you, Gotze, you're right to connect capitalism to feminism, but not the pure form of capitalism, but the ideological capitalism of consumerism and growth and, this kind of capitalism. Now, because women took over, just let me finish Because women took over of professions that used to be male professions. For example, in the 19th century, the vast majority of doctors and the vast majority of nurses, medical nurses, were men, not women. Today, it's women. In the 19th century, the vast majority of educators, teachers, were men. Today, overwhelmingly, it's women. In the 19th century, there was no female judge and extremely few female lawyers. Today, majority of lawyers are women and about 40% of judges are women. In the lower courts, majority are women. So women are taking over sectors, professions, and these are not minor professions. There are two exceptions where women failed to make inroads. They failed to take over. And that is high-tech. In the high-tech sector, women are underrepresented massively. And management. In management, women are underrepresented. And when I say management, it includes politics, because politicians are managers. They manage the state. But it's a question of time, of course. We have Kamala Harris. This would have been unthinkable in the 1950s. It's a question of time. It will take another 100 years, another 50 years. The future is feminine.
I would disagree about the time factor that you mentioned, because I claim that women are not capable of being leaders because they bring their decisions based on emotions and not like a man based on a ratio. So
Everyone
that's why
makes decisions based on emotions. Come on.
No.
This time I agree with Peter. Sometimes I agree with him, sometimes I agree with him.
I'll agree to disagree, but women make their decision based on feelings and emotions. Men are more rational. That's why 80% of the debt in the United States is owed by women, because they are manipulated by the commercials. Oh, this is gonna make you younger 10 years. Boom, buy it right away. We on the other side, men, we have different process of thoughts. Do we need this? Is it worth it? And do I need it to buy it? So that's why the debt is 20% for men. I was going to mention conformism and consumerism, as you mentioned yourself, affecting higher percentage of women. And that's why, because they're more easily manipulated by the marketing companies and propaganda to buy into the consumerism. That's why I don't believe they are capable of being good managers or leaders. Or how many women scientists do you know? I don't want to sound feminist, toxic, but how many scientists are women out there compared
Don't worry,
to
you're
men?
not sounding feminist.
Yes. You're not. God say, relax, you're not.
Anyway, but I would disagree that women are good leaders. Otherwise, it would be proven in history. And I would disagree that women are.
When did I say that women are good leaders? When did I say that women are good leaders?
Well,
I
said a question of time.
No.
Okay, I was going to ask you then. Where? Yes. Okay, where is going to take us? My question: where that's going to take us? The higher percentage of females in the leading positions, knowing that they bring the decisions based on emotions. Where that's going to take us? What kind of society we're going to live in? If the judges, most of them are women, teachers are women, they don't have no punishment, and it's a totally different system of education and judging and mental process thought. So where that takes us?
So first of all, I hope I made it clear. At the very beginning, when I told you about the other talk show that I had to Brexit, I'm not here to express my opinion. I'm interviewed here as a scientist, not as an. I have very clear opinions, by the way, very clear opinions. No. Some of these opinions actually match Peter's opinions, but they're not supported by data.
Numbers.
So by numbers, by data, by information, by so I'm forced to follow the evidence where it takes me, even when I don't like it at all. I do not like the coming world, which is going to be not patriarchy, but matriarchy. I don't like this world. You are right, by the way, that women make decisions differently to men. The psychological studies show that it's not true that women make decisions based on emotions and men don't. That is a myth. There are many studies about this, not a few, and they are over 70 years. So even when women were not consumers, were not so. We have a lot of data about women, feminine decision making, and it's not based on emotions. On the contrary, by the way, in some cases, women are much more calculated, cold, scheming, cunning, and manipulative than men, in some cases. But you're right that they make decisions differently. Whereas men make decisions usually based on some criteria. The criterion could be the law, for example. Women tend to ignore formalisms. Formalism like the law, or formalism like entry criteria, or they tend to ignore rules. They tend to ignore formalism. And instead, what they try to do, they try to create consensus. Women are consensus driven. So if a woman has conflict between what the law says and happy consensus, she will choose happy consensus and ignore the law, which of course would make women not so good judges. Yeah. Similarly, we have a big study about students who apply to universities and people who got interviewed for job interviews. And so we made the study like this. There were women who made the interview and men who made the interview. There were women interviewing the students and the job applicants, and men interviewing the students and job applicants. The men followed clear criteria. This guy has this education, this guy has this experience, this guy, okay, you get the job, bye. They didn't pay attention much to not so much to the personality, impressions. They were much more objective. Women, on the other hand, tried to make peace. They tried to restore harmony. They put emphasis on consensus and so on. So ultimately, they made very different choices to men. And these choices reflected mediocrity. For example, when women were confronted with someone who was brilliant, they ruled him out because brilliant people make trouble. So women reduced the level of the average intelligence of the applicants that they accepted. Women prefer harmony to intelligence. Also, when women came across people who were very experienced, they ruled them out. Because if you are very experienced, you will make trouble to other people who are not experienced. There will not be harmony. So yes, you're absolutely right that women decide differently, not based on emotions, based on empathy, on consensus, on networking. And all these concepts are alien to men because men are goal-oriented. What men asks, can this guy do the job properly? What a woman asks, will this guy be a troublemaker? Is he going to be liked by the other people? Is he going to collaborate well? If he has a new idea, or if he disagrees, will he be pleasant about it? Will he not engage in conflict? Will he even shut up and not share his view because others don't agree? So the emphasis of women was much more consensual, and emphasis of men was on obtaining goals, which would explain why women are underrepresented in science, in management, in high tech, because these are goal-oriented situations where the enterprise or the institution measures output and outcomes. They don't care much about internal dynamics. They care, are you getting the job done? You need to do it at midnight, do it at midnight. We don't care, just get it done. And women care about the workplace, the environment, the pleasure, the pleasant, to be nice, to be kind, to be empathic, to be compassionate, to be things that have nothing to do with accomplishing the goal. So the world is going to look very different And I'm not. I happen to dislike
So
it. But
what you're saying? Yes. I'm sorry. What you're saying is the quality will suffer in the long run.
yes,
Don't fly,
yes,
guys.
I confirmed it, and studies confirmed it. Women prefer mediocre men, mediocre people. They dislike. I'll give you a shocking study. Shocking study. By the way, huge study, so it's not a mistake. When women were asked, would you date a man of 120 IQ? No, of 100 IQ. Women said, yeah, not very exciting, but okay, if there's nothing else. Would you date a man 120 IQ? Yeah, 120 IQ, we will date, definitely, because he has advantage on the 100 IQ men. And now, listen well, shocking. Will you date a man with 140 IQ? No way. No way. Women are afraid of exceptionalism. They're afraid of the outlier. Women want average statistic. Women want to mediocre everything. They want the middle ground, the golden way, you know. They don't want trouble. They don't want, and of course, there's no progress without change. Schumpeter, the famous economist, called it creative destruction. You need to destroy and to disrupt in order to have progress. You cannot continue the same path into new things. Novelty, new things require the destruction of the old. And women are not capable of this. They maintain the status quo. They maintain what exists. They like mediocre people. And they are terrified of super intelligent people, super accomplished people, disruptors, new ideas, invention. They don't like that. They absolutely don't like it.
Okay, so I don't want to go too much further in this direction. It's actually, we have, I think, a little more than half an hour to go. So it was more interesting for me, the point of disagreement that we had previously, but you guys went on a much too larger tangent. I don't know if I should go back, but I do want to pose Sam with one question. And that's to go back to the kind of slave mentality, because I do get the feeling that this podcast is kind of casting capitalism. So the ideology or the economic system doesn't matter in a overly negative light. Basically, what I wanted to ask Sam is, from a psychologist's perspective. So you were saying that people are being conditioned into consumerism. They are being conditioned into wanting things that they don't necessarily need, and they are being paid, including bringing in the women into the workplace to pay them more money, so they have more disposable income, so they can basically consume more and spend it more. And when I brought up,
these are facts. Okay. Everything you said until now, these are facts.
Okay, so I did represent your position correctly. Okay, so
not my position; these are facts. I mean, there are women in the workforce.
I mean, what you are trying to say, yeah. And then I kind of countered, which I don't think we really discussed with, but they really do want those things. So from a purely psychological perspective, in their internal kind of awareness of themselves and the world, these people feel like they want something, and it makes them happy to consume it. You know.
Nope, it doesn't.
But let me just pose my kind of thesis.
But you're starting with the wrong foundation. People are not happy nowadays more than they used to. They're much less happy.
Okay, but my point is, how can you call someone a slave if they basically perceive themselves, like from a psychological perspective? If a person doesn't perceive themselves as slaves, if he doesn't see the boundaries that need to be there in order to be able to define a slave, if they don't see them, if they don't feel them, then what is the actual difference between them being a real slave or a perceived slave? That's what I'm interested in.
Okay, it's a good question. It's a good philosophical question, of course. Nothing much to do with psychology, but it's a philosophical question. But before we come to it, just two comments. First of all, I'm all for capitalism. It's the most efficient method of allocation of resources, and it yields wonderful outcomes. Even China agrees. Even China has capitalism. I'm against the ideology of capitalism, which is growth forever, at any cost, environmental cost, any cost. Consumerism as a form of addiction. I'm against this. This is the ideology of capitalism. And has nothing to do with capitalism. Capitalism was invented essentially in the 16th, 17th century, mainly in the Netherlands, the Baltic states, and so on. And it has nothing to do with it. It's original capitalism was Puritanism. These people were against consumerism, totally against consumerism. Okay, that's point number one. Point number two, in all our conversations, we must always follow where the evidence leads, even if we don't like it. And very often we don't like it. We, not only you, we. The fact is that people are much less happy than they have ever been since records began. I don't know what happened 2,000 years ago. Since we started to keep records about the well-being and happiness of people, which was more or less in the 1840s, that's when we started to keep records. Today, people are the least happy ever. People have never been more unhappy. That's a fact. Second fact, people are much sicker than they've ever been. They live longer, but they're much sicker. Now, it could be that they're much sicker because they live longer. Could be. But these are two facts. When we ask people why they are unhappy, and there is an annual happiness study that has been conducted for decades now. And this study also ranks countries. So
I'm familiar with it.
Finland is the happiest, I don't know.
And also the biggest consumer of antidepressants, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm as shocked as you that Finland is the happiest. I mean, these people are drunk at 10 o'clock in the morning. No exception.
Hey, that's the cure for basically unhappiness. So obviously, yeah.
But when we ask people, so we have longitudinal studies. We look at people all over, and then we pick a group. It's called focus groups. We pick a group and we ask them, why are you unhappy? The number one answer is, I don't have agency. I don't have control over my life. That's the number one answer. And I think it's a great definition of slavery. Now, as to your question, you say, if people are not aware that they're slaves, can we call them slaves? Well, people are not aware that they're psychotic. Can we call them psychotic? The overwhelming majority of people with psychotic disorder are not aware that they're psychotic. They believe they're hallucinations and illusions. Can't we call them psychotic? Narcissists don't know that they're narcissists. They would argue with you that they're not narcissists at all, and yet they are. In short, self-awareness is a very bad test as to your real situation in life. So slavery, I think, is defined in two ways. Your options. If you have many options, the more options you have, the less of a slave you are. And your internal state, to some extent, not necessarily self-awareness, but do you feel good? We call it ego syntony. Are you ego syntonous? Do you feel good with yourself? The answer to the second question is easy. Majority of people feel bad, not good. We know today that 35% of the adult population in industrialized countries report depression and anxiety. 35% report that they are depressed or anxious in a clinical way that requires medication and intervention. That's unprecedented. Unprecedented. Never ever happened before. We know that in 1980, there was a giant study on friendship. People reported in 1980 that they had 9.8 best friends. Best friend means you can confide, you can share, you can ask for advice. In the year 2020, the study was conducted again. People reported that they have 0.9 best friends. From 9.8 to 0.9. We know that 42% of adults in the West, especially United States, 42% of adults are lifelong singles. We know that the frequency of sex has collapsed, deteriorated to the point of vanishing almost, especially among young people. All these are indicators of unhappiness. No one can equate this with happiness. These are indicators of unhappiness. So internal state, as far as I'm concerned, is slavery. In other words, you're not happy and there's nothing you do about it. So that's slavery. Options. We are being brainwashed into believing that we have many options, that there is social mobility, that it's only up to us to shape our lives, that we are in control, that there's nothing, if we put our mind to it, there's nothing we cannot accomplish. We are being told all these lies time and again, that we affect the political process through democracy, that technology empowers us and we can do anything now. We have a smartphone that is greater than NASA in the 1960s. So we are being told all these, mostly lies, not all, but mostly lies. And so we have the illusion of options because we have choice. People confuse choices with options. We have a lot of choice. You go to Amazon, you have 3.7 million books to choose from. That's a lot of choice. But what are your options to buy a book? Amazon. And only Amazon. Amazon controls 87% of the book market in the world. So you have a lot of choice, but you have no options. It's the same in the search engine area. It's the same in artificial intelligence. It's the same in operating system. And it's the same in the political process. In more and more countries in the world, there's only a single party to choose from, and in the best case, two. Even the United States, the new Athens, has only two parties, which increasingly are difficult to distinguish. Two parties. So,
I mean, on paper, yes, but I mean, in the Republican Party, you have, like, Trump is nominally in the Republican Party, but most of the Republican Party considers Trump an existential threat. So
I don't know about most, some, yes. I don't know about most. The statistics disagree with you, but
the establishment of the Republican Party. So, I mean, on paper, yes, but in reality, I mean, you can be for Trump.
But what does it mean if you don't support Trump? You're dead. What? Okay, so that's what I'm saying. You have a choice, but you don't have options. Ultimately, when you go to the ballot box, you have no options. You have a lot of choice, but this is illusory choice. It's an illusion. You have no options. Everything is monopolized. Everything is cartelized. Everything is concentrated. And this is typical of situations where you have an elite or groups, different elites that acquire more and more money, more and more power, more and more access. Today,
but don't you think that's the reason? Because of the reason for this case is because now, in order for you to have more options, the stuff that you have to basically create is bigger, is more abstract. You were bringing up, for example, search engines. Like, to make an engine now, it's previously for you to have a choice whether to move to the neighboring town or, you know, get on a train and move out somewhere really far away. It's comparatively easy to offer options in that kind of scenario. But now the civilization, the world has become so abstract and so complicated that it's become more difficult to offer options.
This is called in economics barrier to entry.
Yeah.
The barriers to entry are higher. But that's exactly what I'm telling you. They are brainwashing you to believe that you have options and choice. But actually, because of barriers to entry and other things, not only barriers to entry, options are dwindling. They're going down, not up. And you're right, the complexity of the world, the barriers to entry is one reason. But the fact is that you're living in a world that is increasingly more concentrated, increasingly less diverse, increasingly more focused on the elites and what they own.
But is that really true on a micro level. I mean, I do
micro level, where
I
can you
do
buy a
get
book?
I do
Listen,
get your point about
Forget
on the
abstract.
macro level.
On micro level, where can you buy my book? I can tell you that when I published my book the first time, 30 years ago, it was available in 9 marketplaces: Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Smashwords, etc., etc. Today, you can buy it only on Amazon.
That might be. I'm not arguing against that. The what I'm arguing against, like I could retort to that the civilization now has moved on from the basic book as a way to transfer knowledge. Right now, I mean, you can have hyper-indexed books, which we now call web
We are not
pages
talking
or
about the
repositories.
character of books. We are talking about how many options you have.
But
You
because
have
there is
fewer options.
but there's
That's a
fewer and
fact.
fewer
Don't argue
demand
with it.
for
There are
books.
fewer and fewer options.
But the demand for books is also lowered. Wouldn't you agree? That people are
Actually,
getting their information and knowledge from different sources.
Actually, that's not
It's
true.
not
Also,
it's not about books, Peter. It's not about books. It's about the principle, about
yes, exactly.
yeah,
It's about the options. How free are you?
There's no-
Options mean
But
freedom.
let's say
How free
on
are
a
you?
micro level, me as I walk through my daily life. I mean, I understand, fine if I want to buy a book, whatever. But on my minute-to-minute
Everything in
experience,
your life is monopolized by elites, and you have usually a single option. Almost everything.
including the
can think of.
including the political choices. The
YouTube.
ballot
but the
is-
political choices are not my minute-to-minute decision.
YouTube
The political
is your
choices are
minute-to-minute.
very-
Amazon is your minute-to-minute. They are all your minute-to-minute. YouTube is your minute-to-minute. There are other platforms, Rumble, Schmumble, they're nonsense. They're bullshit. There's only YouTube.
Come on, they're not bullshit. They're
They're
trying their
bullshit.
best.
There's only YouTube. There's only YouTube. I'm present on all of them. I have the statistics.
So are we,
Forget-
yeah.
Forget it. It's only YouTube. It's only Google. It's only Amazon. It's only, wherever you look, in every field, by the way, not only, I'm talking oil, retail, I mean, you name it. We're down to 1 or 2 competitors.
I understand
And
it's
why are
hard
we
to
down?
challenge. It's hard to challenge, for example, the Google in the search space. But I mean, Google is increasingly.
Which part of the following argument you find very difficult to understand? The less options you have, the less free you are. Can you argue with that?
No, that I completely
Okay, so
agree
what
with
does
that.
it matter why you have less options? The less options you have, the less.
Okay,
free you are.
this is my retort to that. Before the concept of internet search existed, you had less options in different places, and it did look like that those were the limits that you had. But then, as the concept of a search engine came out of thin air, Alta Vista, Yahoo, whatever, they're all dead now. But the concept of a search engine appeared.
Peter,
Multiple
the
players started
fewer
playing,
options,
and
you're I don't know what you're talking about, nor am I interested in what you're talking about. The fewer options you have, the less free you are, and no amount of wizardry with words will change this.
it's not wizard.
And it's not only search engine. It's, for example, retail space. In the United States, Kmart just closed down, and that left Walmart as the only supermarket chain in the United States. End of story. Retail in the United States started in the 1890s, long before search engines. It's nothing to do with modern technology. It's in everywhere. It's in everything. Even in airlines, you have much fewer airlines than you had. Actually, in the United States, you have 3 airlines. You used to have well over 300. This is a fact. And the fewer options you have, the less free you are. This cannot be argued with. This is so simple that there's no need now to ask, why do you have fewer choices? And it's not interesting for the conversation.
I agree.
You're less free. And less free is the definition of slavery.
I agree, but I think we're looking at this in a very narrow way. When we look at airlines, when we look
Peter,
at search engines.
move on. You're beginning to talk nonsense. Move on. No?
My question is like right now,
Your
if
question
I
is
need to
nonsense.
search,
Move to another topic. No?
if I need to search, I don't go to Google. I go
Peter,
to AI search now.
Don't get stuck. Move to the next question.
Yes, it's an illusion of choice, basically. And,
It's not even that. You don't even have a choice. If you want to buy books, you go to Amazon.
Exactly.
No choice even. Even the illusion of choice collapses.
Yeah,
And even in politics,
democracy,
the illusion of choice collapses.
exactly. That's what I was going to talk about. Politics, it's an illusion of choice. It's not even a choice because the democratic representative, they should be representative who came out of the people, but the people did not choose them or select them. The president of the political party selected them individually, and they're his own representatives on the ballot list. So basically, we are not voting in a democracy for the democratic representative in the parliament because those representatives did not come on the ballot. I did not vote for them to come on the ballot, so everybody else can vote. They are selected by one single person who has leverage over them, and it is a oligarchy on the bottom line. It's a
in political science.
Yes.
In political, just to answer this observation, in political science we distinguish two types of democracy. We have participatory democracy and we have representative democracy. The global lie, which is sold by the elites in the process of brainwashing, is that participatory democracy is the only possible democracy because there are too many people. That is, of course, nonsense. Already 40 years is possible to have participatory democracy. Now, the difference between the two. Participatory democracy is when every voter directly chooses someone. Representative democracy is when voters choose someone who chooses someone. So in representative democracy, you choose someone and that someone makes the choice. While in participatory, everyone votes for everyone. It was not possible until 40 years ago because of technological problems. There was no technology available. But starting 40 years ago, and definitely in the last 10 years, this is totally possible. Tomorrow, you can have participatory democracy in Macedonia. Everyone in a smartphone will download an app and they will vote through the app, and the results will be known within less than 5 minutes. It's totally possible. And yet, there is not a single country in the world, with the exception of Switzerland, that allows for participatory democracy. All the countries in the world have intermediaries. They have brokers. They have layers between the voter and the system. So in the United Kingdom and in Israel, you have the party, the political party. You don't vote for directly. You vote for the political party, and the political party chooses the people. In the United States, you have the Electoral College. The Electoral College is often divorced from the popular vote. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. She won the popular vote by 3.7 million votes. And yet, Donald Trump got elected because of the system of Electoral College. Electoral College has nothing to do with the popular vote.
Yeah, it's not a democratic tool. It's a Republican tool.
It's not a democracy. And I can go country by country by country. Not to mention, of course, China, Russia. I'm not talking about this.
Do you think that participatory democracy will increase the options of people?
Of course. In participatory democracy, what will happen? Participatory democracy, you will receive on your smartphone a list. And the list will say, for Prime Minister, this, for representative of your region in the parliament, this. So you'll have, let's say, 20 names. And you will have an app. And the app will open the page with the 20 names. And next to each name, you will have a checkbox. Yes, no. Simple. Single page, yes, no. End of story. Will take you, if you're very slow, 2 minutes. And the most important thing, because it's a smartphone, the results can be known within minutes.
I understand logistically that's a solution.
Yeah, it's nothing.
But do you mean in terms of options? How many of those 20 people will represent different options or the same choices that the elite allows you to have?
Yes, because...
To go back to your original point.
Because today when you select a political party, the political party decides that Sem Vaknin will be prime minister. But if you vote directly, you will have 3 options. 5 options, 90 options. I don't know how many are qualified. And you will decide who will be prime minister.
But I mean, that's the same thing with elections now. Like when you go to the ballot now in Macedonia, you have 50 options. Yet all voting is concentrated in 2 or 3 or 5. So the presence of options doesn't necessarily translate to actual
options. Who will be prime minister? Again, it doesn't matter if you make use of the options. It matters that you have the options. If you make an individual choice not to use the options, okay, many people don't vote. So does it mean we have to cancel voting? You must have the option.
But if we look at it that way, then I would say Amazon is not the only option to get books.
Really?
Barnes and Noble still exists.
Where can you get books?
Barnes and Noble still exists. There is 10 bookstores. There is not 10, but 3 bookstores in Bitola, which have no affiliation with Amazon.
Yeah, and you can get there 4 million books.
You can't get 4 million books, but you can buy basically the books that you're most likely to be looking for based on the appearance of choice, but not having options. You can find
90% of the books on Amazon are not available in Barnes and Noble. I know because I work with both. They're not available.
Okay, but then your
My
point
book
is that
not available because Barnes and Noble went essentially bankrupt.
I see, but that is then your point that options represents that if there's 5 complete copies of Amazon's, but they're not called Amazon?
Option represents your ability to not buy in Amazon.
So, but there is that option right now.
No, there isn't.
And your retort is you can't buy everything that you can buy on.
There isn't.
But your retort is you can't buy everything you can buy on Amazon in another place, and that's true. But then what you're arguing for is 4 identical clones of Amazon, so that you can.
Today are limited. If you can't buy my book anywhere except on Amazon, your options by definition are limited.
No, but if your book is basically an international bestseller, you will be able to buy it in any bookstore in Bitola.
My book happens to be international bestseller.
You know what I mean? Like if it's something.
No, I don't know what you mean. Most international.
Okay, I mean, if it's something that people often look for when they enter, for example, brick and mortar stores.
That is not definition of options. Options is when you are looking for what you need, not what other people want.
So in your basically definition, an option is only something that can support everything a different option can support, not a subset.
An option is that if you want something, you are not limited to a single provider, single politician, single political party, single store, single retail outlet.
I would argue that's the case even right now. They are limited, but I mean, I would say Amazon is not even an option in Macedonia.
Talking to you because I don't know. Sometimes you say nonsense.
Do you know, for example, that a good percentage of the books?
Peter, I prefer if you move on to the next question. Really, sometimes you say things that who's this guy? I mean, what the fuck? Where did you come from? You're talking nonsense.
We are different people. We have different understandings.
It's
we are
not
talking
different.
because we are hoping to understand each other.
Okay, Peter, if you continue, I will have to say goodbye. I don't deal with people who talk nonsense, not based on reality. I'm sorry. You're trying to show that you're clever, you're smart, you're intelligent. Got it. You're intelligent. Move on.
What I'm trying to get clarity from your position. That's what I'm trying to
clarity. You're trying to show that you're clever. Got it. You're clever. Move on. Move on.
Okay. Can I intervene, please? I would say this, that the monopoly or oligopoly is present in all major industries. Currently in United States, the army industry, the war machine, it's about 600-700 billion, I believe. You know, Sam, what bigger than the army is the sick industry, I call it, is the health industry. So basically, once they get you sick, or let's say you have problem with your blood in the sugar, you know, insulin, this and that, you're a lifelong customer. You know how much they're worth? Over 4 billion. I mean, it's a 600 billion. These are 4 trillion. I'm sorry. 4 trillion versus 600 billion, the army. So the health industry, the monopoly, or what you call them, oligopoly, couple of them, COVID vaccines and all of them, they have a monopoly, just like in the political illusion of choice. The same thing is in the health or sick industry, I call it. The same is in the army industry. You gotta have NATO standard, buy NATO standard equipment for your army. So it's a monopoly on a global scale in most of mainstream media. Just mention one word. All of them pretty much are in the hands of the 1%. And like Sam said, we are slaves who have a partial freedom of illusion of the choice. That's what I would summarize this whole thing. If you like to add something, please do so.
There's a concept of media desert in the United States, for example. These are huge parts of the country, today about 80% of the United States, that either have a single newspaper or in majority of cases, no newspaper or any other medium, not only newspaper, and no media of any kind. That's close to 80% of the territory. So if you live in these villages and towns and small cities and so on and so forth, you're utterly dependent on media providers that are essentially national. And there are very few of them, of course. And you don't have a local paper, for example, who is investigating the corruption of the mayor. The mayor is corrupt, the police is corrupt. And used to be in the 50s and 60s and so on, there used to be a local newspaper, and usually 2 or 3 even, and they would compete to expose corruption and so on. Today, in majority of the United States, you have a media desert. In other words, there's nobody there. And so they are
haven't they moved online, basically?
No, they vanished. They disappeared. Online is, they tried the model of online behind paywall, so that you put your content as a paywall, you have to pay, but it didn't work. Even for Encyclopedia Britannica, New York Times, paywall is a huge problem. Washington Post, paywall has become a big problem. It's not fully operational model. And so there is an impoverishment of our options, which this is why I call it slavery, because yes, you can do anything you want. You can buy books, you can buy, pork chops, you can travel, you can drive a car, anything you want, you can do. And your relative material condition, as Petar has said, has improved, of course. But you are more and more, and every year more, dependent on a tiny group of providers, all of them owned by a tiny group of people. That sounds a lot like slavery to me. Slaves have agency. Even slaves in the South, they had agency. They could do this, they could sing, they could dance, they could, But ultimately, it's the question is can you exit the system? That's the key. Can you exit the system?
What is the answer to that? Can you exit the system now?
You can't really exit the system.
Why not?
Because of globalization and so on, but not only because globalization itself is not the major problem. The major problem is international brands have been weaponized. It's well known, for example, that when Walmart comes into a new area, all the small grocery shops close down. They're dead.
Yeah.
Same with Amazon. When I started to work with Barnes & Noble had 2,400 branches all over the United States.
Brick and mortar.
Huh?
Brick and mortar stores?
Yes. All over the United States. It was an institution. People were going there not only to buy books, but to socialize, And then Amazon came. And Amazon didn't only go online. So you could say, okay, there's Barnes & Noble brick and mortar and Amazon is online. Amazon initially established brick and mortar stores.
Yeah, that was a few years ago. Yeah.
Just to destroy Barnes & Noble. And the minute Barnes & Noble closed, they closed. The only purpose of the brick and mortar of Amazon was to destroy. So today, Barnes & Noble is down to, if my memory doesn't fail me, here you can check me up, but I think down to 400 branches, or maybe 200, I'm not sure. They lost 2,000. So this is what I mean. And when I started to sell books, I'm talking about my book, because my book used to be, now is not, but used to be a giant bestseller, an international bestseller. And so when I started, you could buy it in at least 9 locations, at least. Today I have no choice. I must sell it in Amazon. I must sell it in Amazon. And Amazon, by the way, are if you sell it elsewhere, they take your book off. They don't let you, like in perfect competition. In perfect competition, I can sell it here and there. Amazon says to you, if you sell it anywhere else, forget about it. You can't sell it with us. And
They're behaving like a monopoly, basically. Yeah.
They monopoly. They're not like they're monopoly, absolute monopoly. Same with Google Play. If you place an app on Google Play, they put such conditions that take the app outside of other marketplaces, which is why Google now is in court with antitrust. There's an antitrust lawsuit against Google for this. Same with YouTube. YouTube doesn't tell you what to do, doesn't it? If you want to take your video, put it in Rumble, similar BitChute or whatever, no problem with that. There's no problem with that. But Google imposes implicit conditions that are such, for example, censorship of speech, that make it homogeneous, make it monopoly, make it so. This is called monoculture. A few months ago, there was a bug, there was malware in a service provider of Microsoft, not Microsoft itself, but a service provider, security provider. And there was a bug, there was a malware, and thousands of systems around the world collapsed, and there was a big mess, and there were losses of billions and so on.
You're talking about Cloudflare.
Yes. Why did this happen? Because it's a monoculture. Because Microsoft controls well over 90% of all the screens in the world. It's not only a question of choice, of options, of slavery. I mean, these are philosophical debates. We can agree, disagree. It's dangerous. It's simply dangerous. Because if tomorrow there will be a super hacker, a genius, who would find a way to utterly destroy Windows systems everywhere, what will happen to the world? And so we are increasingly becoming concentrated in the hands of probably 10 individuals. We're talking 10 individuals. Bezos, Musk, 10. No, we're not talking.
But do you think that's a recent development? And do you think this is continuing to develop in that direction? Because, I mean, you mentioned Rumble. Rumble became a provider of basic video services as a response. I mean, Rumble used to exist as a provider of just commercial videos, but they were not kind of being a YouTube competition. They have grown into a YouTube competition as a response to what you're talking about.
Yes. Rumble became an alternative to YouTube because of the limitations on free speech, essentially.
So wouldn't you say that explains...
But look at the numbers. But look at the numbers. Who cares that there is... Look at the numbers. It's meaningless. Rumble is meaningless. If it were to vanish tomorrow, nothing would happen. It's meaningless. There was a much bigger rival to YouTube, much bigger than Rumble. Vimeo. Vimeo was much bigger. And YouTube destroyed Vimeo. Destroyed it in a variety of ways. So YouTube doesn't pay attention to Rumble. Rest assured, Rumble will become dominant. Forget about Rumble. Rest assured.
I would say not that we just cannot get out of the system, under the claw of the system, but we cannot even speak against the system. Depends against which monopoly or which oligarch you're speaking against. That's what kind of consequences you're going to bear. Look at Assange. He spoke against the military industrial warmongers complex. That's what happened to him. They have a big claw. They can touch anywhere. So the bigger they are, the scarier the consequences. So far away from getting out of the system, even farther from freedom of speech. YouTube doesn't have a freedom of speech. So like Sam said, Rumble has freedom of speech, but it's too small to compare to YouTube. And the monopoly has YouTube. The monopoly is in Google. The monopoly is in the warmongers, in the health industry. Wherever you look, it is a single person or organization that has the claw over the population in general.
Petar, you know why YouTube? Yes, I agree with Gotze. He summarized perfectly what I've been saying all this. But you know why YouTube and TikTok have become monopolies? Because of influencers. today about 72 or 73% of the traffic on TikTok is influencers selling consumer goods. And I don't know the percentage on YouTube, but it's not small. And of course, advertising on YouTube. So
I mean, they're at the top for sure. So
yes, YouTube and TikTok are extensions of the consumer ideology. They're not educational platforms. They're not free speech platforms. It's bullshit. This is the brainwashing. The actuality, they're an advertising platform, which happens to have content by mistake. But it's again about and who is advertising. An analysis published recently demonstrated that of 10 advertisers control 70% of the advertisements on YouTube, and these 10 advertisers happen to be the biggest conglomerates in the United States, which happen to be owned by these famous 5 oligarchs or 5 tycoons or whatever you want to call them. Whichever way you look, these are loops interfeeding other loops. These are all feedback mechanisms, self-enhancing, enhancing each other. There's no way out. There's no way out. This is the sense of slavery. I agree with you. We are not slaves in the sense that we do things under threat, but the threat is that you will be excommunicated, that you will be taken out of the system. That this is the threat, and the threat is Damocles sword. It's floating above you. If you misbehave, they will silence you. If you misbehave even more, you will end up in prison. If you misbehave, they will ban you, block you, take you out of the system, and there's no life outside the system.
I would say that was worse maybe 2, 3, 5 years ago. I follow a lot of dissident, for example, people that have alternative media and stuff. Previously, when they were blocked on YouTube, it was impossible to find them anywhere. But since the advent of Rumble, since the advent of, since especially Musk bought Twitter, right now a ban on YouTube is not a death sentence.
Not a death sentence, but a coma sentence.
Yeah. So it's
What is Rumble? What is Rumble?
They have the highest live stream. I think Dan Bongino is like the highest live stream numbers. We're talking about concurrent users on the stream watching live.
Well, you have options like Telegram.
Also, yes, they have basically they support streaming.
Since the pandemic, people have learned that they're slaves. I agree with it. There's been a great awakening. That's exactly proves what I'm saying, actually. That people left YouTube and went to Rumble and Telegram. That proves what I'm saying. Why did they leave YouTube if they were not slaves? They left YouTube because they woke up to their situation and their condition. They woke up to this brainwashing and control of the masses, and the masses said, we need an alternative. We need options. And the masses started to construct options. But will this survive for long? I doubt it. The elites will strike back. I have no doubt about this, because the masses are becoming dangerous. The masses are really empowered with technology and so on, and democracy. So they will take away democracy, the elites, you will see. They will take away democracy, and they will take away technology. Suddenly there will be regulations, there will be all kinds of things, and you will find that your ability to operate with technology freely is more and more and more and more and more limited, to the point that you are criminalized if you do certain things.
I would say that I would agree with that up to the COVID pandemic. And I think during the COVID pandemic, the kind of the shadow elite that you're talking about, I think overplayed their hand. And I think they kind of facilitated the awakening that you're talking about. And I think, I believe in the ingenuity of the human civilization. And that's why you have stuff like crypto, basically ways to, as you said, disconnect from the system. Disconnect from the system. And that's one of the things that we are kind of advertising on this podcast for inside Macedonia, to disengage from the narrative of the system, of the state, so that you can kind of reclaim some of the sovereignty that has been taken from you by the state.
I'll finish by mentioning something that I think is undermentioned. Academic publishing, books, copyrighted books. Today you have shadow libraries like Library Genesis, Z Library, and so on, where you can get any book ever published. Anna Archive has most of the books ever published. So for free, you have the biggest library available, and of 107 million published academic papers in history, you have 83 million available through these platforms. In academic publishing and in publishing generally, the masses won the battle. There they won the battle. So maybe you're right. Maybe that's a precedent, and it will happen in other fields. I hope so. I hope so, because the alternative is tight control by a group of tycoons, many of whom are mentally ill. Now I'm speaking as a psychologist. Mentally ill tycoons. And these people will impose on us monoculture. And we know from medicine that when you have homogeneity and monoculture, you're susceptible to viruses and bacteria. You die. The body will die if we don't free ourselves of this.
Awesome. I do believe in the ingenuity of humankind. We will find the solution for this as well. We found solution for everything, including
even for this dialogue.
yeah. All right,
guys.
So,
let me say this last. If you guys found this video interesting and educational, hopefully you have the links that Sam provided for you to upgrade yourself, update. If that wasn't enough, I invite everyone to come on Saturday, so October 26th, 6 p.m. in Ohrid in Kasarna Hub. Professor Sam will be holding a lecture in the narcissistic abuse, title Into the Dark Side and Back. You're all welcome to come. It's a free entry, so I hope to see you all guys over there at 6 p.m. Saturday.
I hope to see both of you, Peter and Gotze. I hope to see you in Ohrid. It's not that far from Bitola, yeah?
Yes. Skopje is far, but Ohrid not so much.
Ohrid not so much. So you got,
thank you.
You got the good bargain.
Yeah. Thank you very much for
thank you for having me.
For your answers and for the interesting discussion. I hope you had a good time, and I hope you will come back when we invite you next time.
Of course.
Everyone else have a